Hi, you guys, popping on real fast. So today I posted in my stories and I asked if there were certain topics that people wanted to hear me touch on, and I got the topic of silver sheet, bezel, and wire a few different times. So I am going to dive into what I personally do, what I use, and hopefully this will help you guys clarify some stuff if you're having questions on that. Again, personal preference. So I always have 4 different kinds of silver sheet on hand. I have 24, I have 22, I have 21, and I have 20. Now, the 24 gauge is going to be the lighter gauge, right? So it's going to be the thinner gauge. This is the stuff that I do all my earring work with. So anytime I'm setting a stone for earrings, I use 24 gauge. Any of the kind of dangle work that I do is going to be 24 gauge. I try to stay as light as possible when it comes to earrings for obvious reasons. You don't want crazy bulky stuff hanging from, your ears. I mean, I don't mind it. I love earrings. That's kind of my jam, but but most people want light and comfortable when it comes to earrings. So I tend to stick with the 24 gauge. I also use 24 gauge on all my layering work. So if you see my stuff where I have animals, or if I have different pendants where it's like the layered silver look, I'm using the 24 gauge because if I'm layering, I'm going to layer, and it's going to get thicker and thicker and thicker. And I feel it's totally okay to use that 24 gauge because by the end of 3 layers, it's super gnarly thick anyway. So it's going to be exactly what you need. 22 gauge I use for just very simple pendants and rings. I would say under 1 inch all around. I can use, I use the 22 for stuff like that. So the smaller pieces. And again, when I started, I used 22 gauge for everything, and it's still super durable. It's super sturdy and it works great. But as I've learned kind of along the ways, I like to get thicker when I'm using the bigger pieces, just because I want the bigger stuff to have some like weight and heft to it. So again, 22 gauge I use for like anything around 1 inch-ish all around and under. Rings and pendants, that's what I use that for. 21 gauge sheet, sorry, I will use for the larger stuff. That's just kind of a single stone on the larger side. That's what I use right around there. And then if I'm going to do a really large piece or a cluster piece, a multiple stone setting, I use 20 gauge. I just feel comfortable when you have something, when you get the larger pieces or the cuffs or the stone settings that have multiple stones, I want to know that it is heavy duty and there's going to be no give to it whatsoever. So I always just do a 20 gauge. Again, that is kind of just where I feel comfortable after, the years I've been doing this. This is what I have found that works great for me. So 24 gauge when you want it lighter or layering, that's what I do. 22 on the smaller side, 21 if you're going a little bit bigger, and then 20 gauge for multiple stone settings. And cuffs, I actually always use 20 gauge for cuffs also. Even if it's a single stone, I use 20 gauge on the cuffs, just because, I don't know, there's something about cuffs I just feel like that it needs to have some like oomph to it, right? So that's what I use for my pendants and my rings. Now, when it comes to design wire and all my kind of accents that I use, I've gone through all the different gauges. My favorite is 18 gauge, just because it's malleable. It's super easy to kind of wrap around and figure out your design. And if it's not working, it's easy to straighten out again and go back in and kind of rework it, right? Like it's my personal favorite, and it feels good to me. I use 16 gauge sometimes too, but 18 is really kind of, because I use more than one piece too. So it's kind of my jam. The 18 gauge it's just my thing. That's what I like. And then for ear wire, I use 20 gauge. That seems to be across the board what everybody seems to be comfortable with, right? Like the 20 gauge, it's not super thick. It fits everybody's ears. Ear wire, that's what I use. And post, when I'm making studs, I use 20 gauge for that too. And then bezel. So no matter what kind of height I'm using, whether it's an 1/8 or 3/16 or whatever I'm using, I personally like 26 gauge. Again, it's just preference. And I know there's all different kinds of gauge, right? Like I know somebody that uses 30 gauge bezel, and I would personally never use that because I feel like it just doesn't work for I'm not comfortable with it. So 26 gauge is where it's at for me. It has enough give to it where it's still sturdy, and I feel like nothing's happened to this. Like when you're setting a stone in this and you get this all pressed down around your stone and everything's flush and comfortable, like this is not going to fall apart. So 26 gauge or higher, you can even do higher too. I've done a little bit thicker. It's harder to work with thicker bezel just because you have to get it pushed down and really kind of work the metal, which again, like it's great. I feel the thicker the metal, the longer and the sturdier it's going to be. So if you like working with thicker bezel, that's great. This happens to just be my personal preference. So 26 gauge on everything I use, no matter actually the height of it. So yeah, that's what I do. If you guys have any comments or questions, drop them. I'll try to get back to them as soon as I see them. And then like and subscribe if you guys want some more info. My next video is going to be on the components. I was going to do that today, but my next one will be on how to add all the wire and the little silver balls and like all the fun stuff, because I had a hell of a time when I started with that, with everything popping off in the tumbler, or you know, after you get almost done and like ruining your like your whole, like everything you do, you just want to cry because one ball pops off. But I will touch on that in my next video. And again, like, subscribe, drop me a comment, drop me a question. I will get back to you as soon as I can. And I hope this was helpful for somebody.